This arrest cost the city $200,000. Securing lives and properties is usually the first job description of police officers. However, while carrying out duties, these officers may cross the line and cause the entire police force to be sued. In this video, we would be showcasing officers that crossed the line, the punishment that followed it, and the aftermath. However, just before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now that you have subscribed, let's dive right in. 1. Daraborn. As with most professions in the world, the job of a police officer is quite sensitive. This is because a small breach of the provisions of the law might have very unintended consequences. That was the story of this poor young man who went into a restaurant to ask for direction to a place he was going on, only to be met with one of the rudest officers. Thus, clearly from the video, it appears the young civilian had asked the officer for the address earlier on and, possibly being dissatisfied with the answer he got, sought to meet another person for confirmation. Definitely from the tone of the voice of the officer, he doesn't seem happy that this young lad ignored his instructions and went to someone else for clarification. This change in tone by the officer indeed begs the question, is it a crime for an officer to be ignored? While we think it is not a crime, it appeared this officer doesn't like getting his feelings hurt and was indeed trying to make the young man pay. During his interview, the young man shed more light on what transpired, and having heard his side of the story, it is safe to say that he was well within his right and did not commit any offense. We know that if officers are allowed to get away having done things like this, it will give them more boldness to go into, breaking every law possible. Just as the young man felt the conversation was already over with the officer, he left the scene, but it seemed that troubled the officer even more. Well, clearly, the officer must have thought himself a mini-god who no one could walk away from. As the attorney to the young man explained further to newsmen present, he educated members of the public that it is within the right of a citizen to resist an arrest when the citizen is arrested unlawfully. Thus, it implies that the officer must not have known that citizens had such rights. Otherwise, he would not have tackled, false imprisoned the citizen, and lastly, to leave him with troubling injuries. With a staggering figure of $9,300,000 awarded by the jury to Gonzalez, the affected citizen, it is safe to say that this young man will be super grateful to the members of the jury who ensured that justice was not only seen, but it was also felt with a heavy noise in the bank. 2. Former principal. Being the principal of a high school places one on the top as far morals are concerned. Often, everyone assumes that a principal of a high school should never be found doing certain things as those things are likely to portray him in the wrong light. This is more true as there are usually hundreds of students and teachers alike who look up to the principal. That was the fate of the poor Ely who, due to the issue he had with a police officer, had to resign from his workplace as a principal. This was owing to the reluctance of Mr. Ely to be seen as a bad example to the hundreds of kids looking up to him. If only the district attorney had done a proper background check before instituting the said charges, maybe Mr. Ely would have still been employed by now. So it turned out that on a particular night, as the Mr. Ely and his wife were driving their vehicle, another vehicle jumped a red light and hit the Elys. Under that circumstances, the proper thing would have been for the investigating police officer to pull up nearby CCTV camera, or even the dash cam with which to know who was at fault. Rather, the officer was quite early in concluding, and thus pressed charges against the Elys. Not only were the Elys accused of causing the accident, they were equally accused of attempting a hit-and-run offense with their vehicle. That kind of accident certainly looked bad to be associated with the principal of a school. As the whole matter was dangling, the school board, where Mr. Ely presides as the principal, threatened to sack him over the allegations brought up against him by the court. In order not to further bring his name to disrepute, Mr. Ely resigned from his school as a principal so that his name can remain clear. Thus, as if the district attorney were waiting for him long ago to resign, they immediately dropped their charges against the principal, which the principal described as a bogus charge. Thus, in a bid to clear his name, which seems to have been smeared by the whole dispute, Mr. Ely filed a suit against the officer behind the whole dispute for a whopping $12 million. Well, while the amount might seem very substantial, still no figure can remedy a name that has been brought to the mud. As, or fingers are crossed, we hope the matter be resolved, and justice be attained. 3. Metro wrongful arrest. Perhaps a sad, reoccurring theme among police officers is wrongful arrest of innocent citizens. It has been recommended that officers should clearly listen to details regarding a suspect and arresting only the person that fits in the profile, rather than merely arresting anyone found within a specific radius. It has indeed been months after the sad incident took place in the life of this young man. However, since the incident, the poor man has not fully recovered from what he classifies as one of the worst days of his life. From the account of story given by the Metro Police Force in that fateful night, they were on the lookout for a suspect who was believed to be fleeing a homicide scene. Thus, without further confirmation, the officers present took a step that would forever haunt the life of this poor man. Having assumed that the young man who was making his way to the convenience store was the man wanted for that crime, the officers swarm around him, and the next events that took place were rather shocking. Even if the man was the most wanted man in the world, it certainly did not call for over 8 policemen heavily armed to seek his arrest. The arrest could as well been carried out if it were only 2 police officers present on that night. Thus, as if the officers had realized that they had the wrong guy, they looked for every possible reason to pin a crime on the scene of the crime. We all know that it is rare for a suspect who is fleeing from a crime scene to casually walk to the convenience store to get item. The concept itself should have warned the officers that the young man was innocent, as if indeed he was the suspect. He would have been looking for a way to make a quick getaway and not to plaster his face all over the CCTV camera found in the convenience store. Having realized that the young man was innocent of the allegation leveled against him, as if they were magicians, the officers found another reason to take him to the jail. That must have been very hard for the young man whose plans were simply altered, as the officers could not catch the suspect they were in fact looking for. While the case was later dropped off 7 months after the convenience store incident, still the scars have not been healed in the heart and mind of the poor young man. As form of agreement, the police force, however, cooperated and paid the young man $250,000 for his troubles. We sincerely hope the amount will go a long way in healing the poor man of all he had to go through in the hands of those meant to protect him instead. 4. Jaywalking. What's the worst thing to be done to a suspect who jaywalked? Possibly give a ticket and then maybe charged to court. However, in the case of this young man, he received the opposite. After jaywalking right in front of the officers, it was reported that the officers must have lost their cool and now, with the aid of a trigger, determined to stop the young man. As the young man continued asking why he was being arrested, it seemed instead the officers were more concerned with subduing him rather than explaining to him what his offense was. Thus, with the aid of a taser, which the officers used 3 times on the man, the poor man was finally subdued. Having recruited a good attorney, it seemed as if the police force immediately knew that they had insufficient evidence against the young man. They dropped all the bogus charges they had against him before then. Well, despite that, the police force has dropped the suit. Neither the victim nor his lawyer were interested in letting go without a hefty fine paid by the police force. With a claim of $10 million, the lawyer was quite sure that after paying that sum, the police force will be more cautious, especially when dealing with innocent and unarmed civilians. In light of these, please share your thoughts with us on the comments section. Well, if you got to the end of the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like, share, and turn on the post notification button so you don't miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.